talk a little bit about this. So we're praying on Wednesday night. That's our effort. So I thought it might be good to come into a praying text this evening as we lead into that on Wednesday. And here in Psalm 90, you don't think of the Psalms. I don't suppose if I said, give me somebody that you think of when I say we're going to read from the Psalms, and I don't suppose that Moses is the name that would come to mind. You probably would run immediately to David, right? That's generally who we think of when we think of the Psalms. But if you back up into most of your notations in your Bibles, probably you would see somewhere in one of your paragraphs it'll say a prayer of Moses. And in fact, if you go back to the beginning of the text in Psalm 90, I should say, they're not chapters, they're individual psalms. But in Psalm 90, notice at the beginning, a prayer of Moses, the man of God. And so this psalm, though sung, and though set for that purposes, but yet written long before we generally think of as in terms of when the Psalms were written. Moses pens the words that are shared within this particular psalm, and I suppose we could explore it all hurriedly, and that wouldn't be maybe as much value. So I want to look at a small section of it beginning in verse 12. And so Psalm 90, verse 12, the narrative that Ron just read for us a moment ago. And so within this prayer, one of the statements that Moses makes is, so teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And I think about that statement that he makes. The initial concept that is introduced is, Lord, teach me. You know, sometimes we ask ourselves, well, how much do I know about the Bible? How much can I know about the Bible? How much guidance will God provide? Will He really help and lead and give to all men liberally like He promises to do? And so within that kind of conversation we have, here's Moses recognizing that one of the prayers that he wants to offer before God is, Lord, teach me, educate me. And let me understand what your will and purpose for me is. And there's something specific he'll reference here in a moment as well. But the generic concept of recognizing that God can instruct and share and teach and educate us. And in specific, Moses says, teach me to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Lord, help me recognize that I'm not going to live forever. If you recall, this is the same psalm, by the way. If you go into Psalm 90 and verse 10, that's sometimes the verse that we jump to in this particular psalm, because that's the one where we learn about those 70, and if by reason of good health, 80, right? Is that correct? Yes. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength, they are 80 years. There's this acknowledgement that Moses makes. And by the way, that's kind of interesting coming from Moses. If you know something about him, you know that he actually lived beyond 80, right? He lived a life that was about 120 years. He was 40 years in Egypt, 40 years as a shepherd, and then 40 years leading the people of God out of Egypt and through those challenges that they met after that. And yet, even a man who lived to be 120 years, even a man who acknowledges or recognizes the longevity potentially that God was blessing him with, he wanted others to appreciate that the expectations are not necessarily to have 120 years on this life. The expectations are different. And I think sometimes we can kind of maybe get hung up on those numbers and think, well, 70 is really good and 80 is great. And anything beyond that, bonus, right? But that's maybe not really what Moses is trying to get at. I don't know that he's trying to fixate on a numerical kind of chronological moment in time where once you pass 70, buddy, you might as well just cash it in, right? Because nothing good's going to happen after that, although some of you told me that. But I think Moses is simply trying to get us to what he says in verse 12. Moses is prepping within the psalm. He's prepping about what he's going to say here in verse 12. Why do I need to recognize that reasonable consideration says 70, 70 years, or 80? Why does a reasonable person recognize that? Because that reasonable person will then pray unto Jehovah, teach me to number my days. Let me recognize that 70 is not as much as I think it is. Help me recognize that 80 is not as much as I think it is. Help me recognize that my opportunities are fleeting. And the days are coming and going very rapidly. And I need to number them and understand that the opportunities to gain wisdom and understanding from your message are fewer and fewer as the days go by. Mark Psalm 90, we'll come back, but I want you to look at a couple other texts with me. Psalm 39. Psalm 39 and verse 4. Now here's a psalm of David, more familiar to us as one who would write psalms. Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am. Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadth, and my age is nothing before you. Certainly every man at his best state is but vapor. My friends, I don't think it's coincidence that James writes and says that life is but a vapor that appeareth for a little while and then vanishes away. I am convinced that he understood what David was saying here in this psalm. And so he doesn't make that reference just kind of coincidentally. I think there's inspiration there. That James is reiterating something that the psalmist David has already expressed here in Psalm 39. That life is like that vapor that appears and may seem like it may be there forever. But slowly but surely it begins to dissipate. Lord, show me how fleeting I am. Show me and remind me, teach me how frail I am. The more I recognize that, the greater dependence I will recognize upon Thee. The more I recognize that my time is swiftly going by, the greater urgency I'll make about my relationship with You. Help me, teach me, guide me to number my days, to know my end. And to know that the opportunities to honor God and to serve Him are going to come and go very rapidly. And to come to a wisdom and understanding of His will for me is important in the moment and not to put it off. Paul wrote to those in Ephesus in Ephesians chapter 5. And Paul wrote to those here in Ephesus to appreciate the value of time. So see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Avail yourself in the appropriate time to understand the will of the Father. Don't assume that tomorrow will always come. Don't assume that the opportunity to grasp His purposes and to honor His will and to be faithful unto Him, don't just assume that those opportunities will always be available to me. Redeem the moment that you have. Value the opportunity that God is giving you today to know His purpose and to know His will and to be His child and to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Understand the opportunity I have in the moment and value your time. How many times have you assumed that you had enough time to do 3 things and you really only had time to do one of them? And the truth of the matter is, because in the back of your mind while you're doing the first one, you realize there's 2 more to be accomplished and time is fleeting away. And what happens is we don't do the first one very well. We do the second one even more poorly. And the third one barely gets recognized. Because we've overextended our time. And so Paul writes to Ephesus, make sure you value and redeem time. Make sure you appreciate that time is fleeting. Number your days, the psalmist would say. Teach me, Lord, to count and number my days. Help me appreciate the value of the time that I have and that what priorities must come in relationship to that time. What needs to be done right first and then move to other things. And our service to God and honor to Him needs to come first. That's why Moses says, teach me to number my days. That's why Moses says, remind me that 70, if I'm fortunate, 80, wow, a little bit of help me get there. But help me number those days. And to recognize how fleeting time can be so that I can gain your wisdom, your understanding, your purposes. In Proverbs 3 and verse 13. In Proverbs 3 and verse 13, happy is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding. For her proceeds are better than the profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare with her. Length of days is in her right hand, in her left hand riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who retain her. Happy is the man who finds wisdom. Happy is the man who retains wisdom. Happy is the man who uses wisdom. Happy, joyful. Lord, give me a heart full of wisdom. And so the next time we wonder, do I have enough time? The next time I sit down to prioritize my time and try to determine whether I'm going to spend my time in certain activities and certain choices and decisions, then before I ever begin to set that calendar, before I ever begin to set that schedule, pray before the Father. First and foremost, Lord, teach me to number my days. Help me to recognize how little time that I actually have, and then help me set the priorities. Give me the wisdom necessary to set the right priorities in my life. And friends, the truth of the matter is, I don't always know what those priorities should be. I don't always know sometimes how to know the difference between better and best. I don't always appreciate in the right ways what I really ought to be spending my time doing. And so I pray before the Father. That's the beauty of what Moses is saying. Pray that He educate and teach us and help us and lead us to make wise decisions about our time. And number 2, back in Psalm 90, look again there in verse 13. Return, O Lord, how long, and have compassion on your servants. O satisfy us early with your mercy, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. It gives me the impression Moses is writing this during the wilderness time, during the punishment time of the people. And he's prayerful that the Lord will ultimately come and bring mercy and compassion. Now, again, I may mistake it. I may have missed something. Correct me later if I'm wrong, if you understand a greater portion of that timing than I. But here's the point that he's encouraging us to appreciate. Here's this message that's coming of, Lord, come back to, let us know your compassion on your servants. Let us appreciate your mercy and your kindness. And let that be upon everyone. Have you ever stopped to think about maybe sometimes we would prefer to pray, Father, bring justice to that guy and mercy to this guy. Bring vengeance and vindication to that guy, but let me have mercy and grace and your unmerited favor. But what I love about Moses here, he uses the plural. He says, have compassion on your servants. This isn't just about him. This isn't just about what God might provide for him. He wants the Lord to return and bring favor to them and have mercy and compassion towards them. There's a lot of hurting people. We may not understand why it is that they behave in the ways that they do. And I'm not trying to justify anybody's sin, and anybody that knows me knows that I'd never do that. But sometimes we don't know the challenges and the hurt and the difficulties that some have experienced. And sometimes maybe our desire is that we would just pray, Father, deal with them. But Moses says, have compassion and mercy. Return to them. Satisfy us early with your mercy, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Joy and gladness, happiness seem to go hand in hand with the mercy that is extended from Jehovah. Judgment is something to quite the contrary. And the beauty of God is, and that you see it over and over again, is that God, though there's anger, though there is times judgment, though there is wrath that comes forth from God when He finally reaches a threshold where there's just no more patience, But God never seems to stay angry. Have you ever noticed that? Even in some of the darkest moments where God brings judgment, He returns back to mercy and compassion. In Psalm 103 and verse 8 beginning, the Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in mercy. He will not always strive with us, nor will He keep His anger forever. He has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor punished us according to our iniquities. Can we just understand a basic quick fact? There's not a person sitting in this room who has always gotten what they deserve. We don't always get what we deserve on either side of that conversation, by the way. Sometimes maybe we think we deserve a reward or some kind of benefit because of some service or work or something that we've done, and maybe we feel cheated. The truth of the matter is no one ever gets everything that they deserve on either side of that conversation. But in particular, when it comes to consequence of our sin and the challenges and difficulties that God could choose to bring to us, He has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor punished us according to our iniquities. For as the heavens are high above the earth, so great is His mercy towards those who fear Him. That's a qualifier, by the way. Who has the privilege, who has beauty of being able to obtain the mercy rather than consequence? Who has the beauty of knowing the mercy of God rather than His justice because of sin? And He states very clearly that those who are fearful of Him, those who respect Him, those who honor Him. As far as the east is from the west, verse 12, so far as He removed our transgressions from us. I guess our world is round, so they say. Since Columbus, I guess. Probably, never mind. But I suppose in some senses that eventually, if you kept going east, you would eventually be west and back right because it's a circle. But what's the point He's trying to make? As far as reaching as you could put, that's how far away God puts our iniquities and sins. His mercy and grace and kindness is able, as far distant and disconnected as east is to west, that's the distance He can create between them. As a father pities his children, so the Lord pities those who fear Him. Children, listen to me for a minute. If you ever hear these words from your parents, this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. They don't mean physically. What they mean is that no right-thinking parent doesn't want to show pity upon their children. It's the very nature of being a father. It's the very nature of being a mother to want. But sometimes the difficulties come. But He said, just like a father who doesn't want to bring God doesn't want to bring consequence. So for those who fear the Lord, He pities them. He recognizes their challenges. He knows our frame. He knows our frame. I thought about that phrase there in 14, that He knows our very makeup. He remembers that we are dust. You ever thought about that idea that God remembers how He created us? God isn't forgetful of the manner in which He brought us into existence. God is not forgetful about how it is that He took dirt from the earth from which He created and fashioned and created man from that earth. He understands the frailty, the frame, the makeup, the design, the nature of His created beings. As for man, verse 15, his days are like grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourishes, for the wind passes over it and it is gone. And its place remembers it no more. But the mercy of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear Him, and His righteousness to children's children, to such as keep His covenant, and to those who remember His commandments to do them. Qualifier, right? Those who fear Him, those who choose His commandments, those who honor Him, they have the beauty of knowing that God's character and nature of wanting to be merciful and compassionate towards us never wavers. It is everlasting. We are like the grass. We come and go, come and go. Man has come and gone for a long, long time. But the nature and character of God has not changed ever. The desire to be merciful and compassionate towards us and a recognition of how we're structured and made helps God show that mercy and kindness. And so when Moses prays, "Return to us, Lord, with your mercy," when he offers that petition before the Father and encourages God to appreciate the compassion that was necessary to carry the fearful and the obedient, we can appreciate it the same. And thirdly, Moses in some ways says, "Give us a life to live." Return your mercies to us. Don't leave us out in these consequences for any longer. Return, O Lord, how long, and have compassion on your servants. Oh, satisfy us early with your mercy, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Give us a joyful life to live. Make us glad according to the days in which you have afflicted us, the years in which we have seen evil. Let your work appear to your servants, and your glory to their children. And let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Father, let our efforts and our work and our desires to accomplish your will and create a joyful and happy life for ourselves, grant that unto us. Appreciate Moses recognizing his desire to acknowledge that genuine happiness in life comes from the Creator. And to appreciate that God can take sorrow to joy. God can bring us out of devastating situations and restore us and bring back to us the understanding of His kindness and His grace. In John chapter 16 and verse 20. In John 16 and in verse 20. Most assuredly I say to you that you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice, and you will be sorrowful. Doesn't sound very good so far, does it? But, here's the contrast. But your sorrow will be turned into joy. God, through His Son, can take sorrow and turn it into joy for the fearful, for the obedient, for those who honor His commands. That's what the psalmists were saying, right? God is not powerless in our difficulties and our hardships and the things that tend to take the joy and happiness and gladness out of life. God is not powerless that He cannot bring back life to live. But we need to be praying for it. We need to be putting that before the throne of God. Sometimes maybe we assume that that's just my responsibility. That I am personally responsible for my own happiness. We even hear people say versions of that. Now, I never negate personal accountability. The Bible's filled with illustrations of that as well. But let's not forget that there's a greater power than self. There's a greater power working in our lives as followers and believers in God and in His Son. There's a greater work at hand than self. Why not get down on our knees and pray before the throne of God? Give us and lead us to joy and happiness. Guide me to where I can find peace. Lead me out of the sorrow and devastation and difficulties to the joy that only you can bring. Establish the work of our hands and let our accountability and work bring honor and benefit. The first part of chapter 3 of the book of Ecclesiastes, he basically gives this contrast that there's a time for everything in life. And he goes down through and he contrasts that through various things. But I want you to pick up your reading now in verse 9. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. Our prayer should not be, Lord, make me great. Our prayer should be, Lord, You are great. Let my work yield fruit. Lord, You are great. You are the giver of all good gifts. Provide for me my daily bread. Now, let my work and my effort not be about me and what I've accomplished, but let it be about how You've blessed and helped and strengthened. Establish the work of our hands. Let our prayers before the throne of God recognize that He can create tremendous life to those who will turn to Him. And He can provide a stability cannot be found otherwise. One last text and the lesson will be yours. Go to Proverb 4. Proverb 4, verse 25. Let your eyes look straight ahead and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet and let all your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or the left. Remove your foot from evil. I want you to see what he said there in verse 26. And ponder the path of your feet and let all your ways be established. Without challenging or being overly personal, but I want you to think for a minute. As you've gotten older, and you can decide whether you've gotten older or not, that's your personal choice. But let me ask you this. As you've gotten older, do you watch your steps a little more closely? Do you gauge them a little more closely, watch and pay more attention to what's out in front of you and what is to come and what might be an obstacle in the way and what might be a hazard that you just assume avoid? Maybe when you were 18, you would just run full steam ahead, and if anything happened to come, you'd jump over it, go around it, or run through it. But as we grow older and we become a little wiser and recognize that maybe a little more wisdom needs to be applied to the path that I'm taking, the choices that I'm making. Maybe I'll wait for that crowd to clear a little. Maybe I'll take that ramp instead of those 32,000 steps. And that's the imagery I believe God's driving at here through the Proverbs. Establish my path. Let me ponder. Let me consider it. And Father, give me enough wisdom that understands that there are going to be multiple paths that life offers me. There are going to be lots of choices that I have to make, decisions that I have to make. Lord, give me the wisdom. Teach me the value of time. Teach me before I make my life decisions and my life choices and things that will affect me not just in the moment, but things that will affect me far down the road. Give me the kind of wisdom that I need in the moment to set my foot in the right direction. In recognizing that the paths that I choose now might very well have a tremendous impact upon the joy and happiness that I may have later. And help me to recognize that every choice and every decision and every step that I take in life ultimately has eternal consequence to it. So Moses prays, Father, give us a life to live, but give us a life to live that recognizes that all things come from You and that all that we have is a gift from You and that You're the great provider of all things. So as we consider prayer leading into Wednesday night, not that moment in time, but as we consider our petitions before the Father, and what impressed me about this narrative, and we just looked again at just a small snippet of it, was there's a whole lot more to pray about than maybe we thought. There's a whole lot of other things that we need to be putting before the throne of God. More than thanks for the steak and potatoes, amen. Right? More than thanks for the good night's sleep. There's a depth about prayer that we can be focused upon and thinking about. Moses didn't say, Lord, help me because I'm getting old. Moses said, Lord, help me learn something because I'm getting old. Teach me to number the days. Help me see the vapor as it's disappearing day by day. Give me wisdom to choose the right path. Give me the mercy and compassion. Moses recognized the need to pray for more than just the basic fundamental things that we commonly think of when it comes to prayer. And I'm going to make this statement because I don't want to make this statement Wednesday, so I want to make it now. Number one, let's recognize this challenge. One of the hardest aspects to me of our worship assemblies together is to be the one who steps up here and tries to convey the thoughts that we're all going to collectively share before the throne of God. It's hard. It's not an easy task. And so because of that, what happens sometimes is we get comfortable with phrases, right? We kind of get settled on certain phrases that we've heard over the years. I'm not condemning that, I'm just accepting a reality here. And so we become very comfortable with the kinds of things that typically fit public prayer. And our prayers often seem very, I don't want to say repetitious, but they seem common to us because we've heard those phrases and those same sentiments in a repeated way. Now, that's no disrespect. Again, that's not condemnation of anybody. It's hard publicly. Here's my point. My point is, don't let the difficulties of what public prayer is shape your private prayer life. Don't mimic just what you commonly hear when men step up here to do their best to offer a prayer on behalf of the whole. Don't become that way in our personal prayer, because personal prayer life is far easier. It's far easier because it's just you and your God. And you can just open up your heart without worry about, is that going to sound right? Are people going to understand that? Is it going to make sense? Why is he praying about that? You don't have to process any of that. You just open up your heart. And I encourage you to, as you move forward in your personal prayer life. Now we're going to be more personal, Lord willing, come Wednesday than maybe we typically are. And we're going to try to get out of those kind of patterned approach and open our congregational collective heart. But Moses prayed, and we can learn great valuable lessons from his thoughts, how the kinds of things that we could be bringing before the throne of God. Maybe you're outside of Christ tonight. You need to come to know the remission of sins through the blood of the Lamb. If we can encourage you to appreciate the beauty of what baptism is really all about, not some church ordinance, not some Church of Christ rule, but the beauty of dying with Christ, being buried with Him in baptism, and coming in contact with the blood of the Lamb to be raised to walk in newness of life. Or maybe there's been a time where that was fulfilled in your life, but it's time to come back and say, Lord, I need your compassion and your mercy. I need to get back on the right paths again. And I need your wisdom and your guidance to get there. So if we can help you tonight, encourage you in some way to come back or to honor our faithfulness and honor our obedience unto the Father, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?